McCain-Obama Reframed Part 3. I'm drawing to some extent on a book called Troublesome Young Men by Lynn Olson, O-L-S-O-N. It's a story of people in the Tory party, the Conservative Party in Britain, who helped oust Neville Chamberlain, who was Prime Minister from 1937 through 1940, who took Britain into World War II unprepared, sent troops in inadequately trained, poor equipment, a man who didn't want to piss off Hitler, who didn't want to get the Germans mad at the British, who thought he could make a deal with Hitler, and it proved otherwise. Even after declaring war on Germany, the war wasn't prosecuted enthusiastically. It was as if he lived in a different world, a world in which he was the only important person, and what he thought he could do was in no way related to his abilities or the reality of a war with Germany. Churchill succeeded him. Churchill wasn't elected, and neither was Chamberlain. The last time there was an election in Britain prior to World War II was Stanley Baldwin. He believed that Germany was a threat, but he lied to the British people because he thought if he talked openly about the threat to Britain's security from a rearmed Germany, that he would be defeated. And this gave way to a large conservative victory. Neville Chamberlain became Prime Minister in 1937. He signed an agreement in Munich that essentially conceded half of Czechoslovakia to Germany. This turned out to be extremely important because Czechoslovakia was a heavily armed country with a munitions industry, and actually, with British help, could probably have fended off the Germans. So when Czechoslovakia was lost, Poland was left, and he gave a promise of support to Poland. Poland, in fact, was defenseless. So this idiot, or a man who, probably not an idiot, but someone who acted as if the way a psychotic person would, somebody who, under conditions of anxiety, denied reality. Churchill went to a military college. He was a very good military strategist, and he was this before the war started. Churchill saw Germany as a genuine threat, not fascist, but he saw Britain losing its independence. In 1940, there was an attempt by Mussolini to negotiate a settlement between Britain, who was being decimated in the war. France had already been defeated. Norway had been taken over. The Low Countries had been taken over. Rotterdam was being firebombed, and Chamberlain was on cloud nine. Churchill was personally fearless. He'd been a reporter, he'd been in war situations, he was taken prisoner by the Boers, he escaped and helped some British prisoners escape. And so this was a situation in which his egotism, his self-confidence, his military knowledge, and his notion that under no condition could Britain surrender. This was what was needed at that time. Churchill wasn't elected. He was put in office because there was a lukewarm Tory majority at the time. They didn't even like him. Churchill, following the war, following the success in World War II, a few months after the war, was defeated in the general election. He was elected in 1951 as a very old man, but Churchill wasn't good for anything else politically. This was his spot, and he was right for it. I think this should be kept in mind when we think of an American political campaign. The presidents that have been in office since I have been able to vote started with Kennedy. I voted for Kennedy. Kennedy had an early summit meeting with Khrushchev where he wanted to indicate his toughness to Khrushchev. So he was injected with amphetamine. So that he could be properly assertive with Khrushchev at the summit conference. It failed. And because Kennedy failed there, he was forced into the Cuban Missile Crisis and into an assertive buildup and a failure to give up Berlin. But all of these things were because Kennedy was unsuited to the office when he took over. Johnson was stuck with the war. He got through an unprecedented civil rights bill and then failed because he couldn't handle something that came up for which he was unprepared. Nixon was totally unprepared to be president and a despicable human being on top of it. Carter was not despicable, but he got in because he snuck in. And it was a time in American history where it wasn't clear what was needed. I think Reagan was also a despicable human being, and I think although now he's been glorified by the history industry because they can sell books, I believe he was a disaster. Bush failed to give a signal to Saddam Hussein that he couldn't take over Kuwait. So Bush's incompetence led to the need for the U.S. to get involved in the first Gulf War. And then he left Saddam Hussein in power, which set up the situation that ended up with his incompetent son attempting to achieve glory and using the American people as his instrument. And now we have another election coming up, and I would say at the moment our dependence on energy that comes from dangerous places is the one thing that would lend itself to a long-term solution. I don't think anybody is competent to develop an educational system in the United States. I think education is, by its nature, something that will never be mastered, except possibly by me. And so, I personally believe that Obama is a crapshoot, and a crapshoot I would be willing to take.